You really want to do this in front of everyone? Fine, here. Her voice cut through the hush. That folder, open it unless you're scared. The man's hand trembled, but he grabbed the folder anyway. Don't act surprised, you lied to the entire board. Her eyes drilled into his, sharp as glass shards in the fluorescent light. You think this'll matter, no one will care, he snapped, voice too high. They will when they see what you buried, she said louder. Chairs scraped as the crowd looked over. She nodded to the man holding the folder. Read it out loud, now. He hesitated, sweat running down his jaw. Several people craned forward, silent. Her hands were steady, knuckles white on the cane. Seconds stretched to breaking, the tension was knife-edged. Do it, she commanded. How did a woman who once had nothing end up here, squaring off under the hot lights? To find out, you have to go back, before the snow moved in, before the steel door, before anyone suspected what he'd done. The box was too heavy. Ruth shifted her weight, her bad hip aching, as she tried to wedge the last carton of records between the passenger seat and the battered dash. In the rearview, sun glare and dust painted the world in gray. She had $83 left in her bank account, a car older than half the town, and 3 days before the winter storm made this little wedge of the Texas panhandle impassable until spring. She was 69 and felt every minute. Her mother's debts hovered in the air, compounded, unending, and so Ruth worked double shifts, weeks at the supply depot, making sure drilling crews got their parts on time. Most nights, she came home to silence and microwave dinners. Now even that was gone. The supply company had closed and her mother's house was lost. All that was left, a yellow envelope from a lawyer in Amarillo and a set of rusty keys to a restaurant no one wanted, a weather-beaten hulk on the edge of a ghost town, sign half fallen, windows boarded up for more than a decade. Ruth squinted down at the wrinkled paper she'd clutched since sunrise. Be at the old Waterhouse diner at noon. Transfer papers inside, it read, scribbled in lawyer's ink. No signature, cheap envelope, cheap hope. She felt the edge of laughter fighting at her throat. Maybe I'll find a stash of aged onions and broken plates, Ruth muttered to herself. She started the engine, crackling beneath her seat, and pointed north for the diner. The sky was endless, stark blue bleeding toward storm. Cold dust from the nearby siding road rolled ahead, curling like ghosts. Her phone buzzed with texts. You finally got something, old girl. Don't eat anything in there. Sarcastic, dismissive voices. She turned it off. If you've ever found yourself staring at a door more hopeful people walked past, scraps, debts, and all, that's where Ruth was. And within the next hour, she'd find something no one saw coming. A folded slip wedged in the stall of a ruined stable, marked with her grandfather's initials. She clutched the keys so tightly her palm ached. Today wasn't going to be like any other. The drive was 90 minutes of nothing, flurries of dust, and accidental stillness, fences leaning in surrender. Ruth talked to herself as the fields blurred. Come on, keep straight, 5th mile ahead. Her left knee twinged when she pressed the brakes. Every jolt a reminder, second shift at the depot, 20 years running just to pay debts that were never hers to make. When she reached the Waterhouse diner, the parking lot was a soft blanket of sand. Only 2 tire tracks, hers and a set leading toward the skeletally leaning stable out back. She slipped out of the car, the wind keening so shrill it nearly drowned her muttering. This place smells like disappointment and kitchen grease. The diner itself looked as tired as she felt. Paint peeled like old wallpaper and a faded open sign clung to a single nail. The lot was flaked with old receipts and coffee cups, half buried in dust. Ruth forced the lock in the restaurant door. It groaned, swinging open into a cold kitchen, counters littered with dried leaves and petrified ketchup packets. The silence pressed on her chest. No sooner had she shuffled to the counter than she spotted an envelope taped to the kitchen freezer. To Ruth, stall 4, scrawled in blocky handwriting. That's not mine, she whispered, her voice cracked with uncertainty. Then louder, who the hell leaves notes for me out here? She pocketed it, A memory flickered. Her grandfather, stoic as the prairie, smelling of aftershave and dust, always disappearing at dusk toward the stable after dinner. "Don't wait up, kiddo, work to finish before dark," used to say it every night. Her heart pounded, not with excitement, but a sudden, leftover dread. Gripping her cane, she staggered across the hard-packed lot, aiming toward the horse stalls. The fourth one, her grandfather's number. The place he always spent his last minutes before bed. The stable creaked around her. Hay bedding crunched beneath her boots. She braced herself, breath clouding in the frigid air, and knelt beside stall number 4. The ground was uneven, mudded with years of neglect. Her hands scrabbled through hay and found cold, unyielding steel, the corner of a trapdoor set flush in the dirt. Her throat tightened. She pressed her shaking fingers beneath the edge, pulling up. It wouldn't budge. She grunted, shifted her weight, then slammed her palm against it. "Come on," she cursed under her breath. A hinge shrieked, the door lifted, dust billowed out, stale but oddly chemical. The first hook had set. Beneath the steel, a ladder descended into shadow. Ruth stared down, nerves jangling, but the hungering spark of trust for her grandfather flickered in her chest. Even now, maybe especially now, nothing about this was familiar. She stuffed the letter opener into her jacket and lowered herself, rung by rung, into the unknown. The ladder groaned beneath her weight. A harsh fluorescent bulb blinked on as her feet touched concrete. She drew a shaky breath, the smell of stale hay replaced by ammonia and old copper. Around her, reflectors along the wall revealed a workspace, dusty vials, notebooks stacked in plastic bins, sample trays labeled in a shaky, familiar hand. Rows of faded maps, geological prints, thin veins traced in blue and gold. Her grandfather's handwriting danced across most of them. Ruth moved across the cramped room, hands brushing plastic sheeting and glass beakers teetering on wire shelves. Her every step was deliberate, afraid any sound might wake a secret older than the diner above. She almost missed the folded slip on the far workbench, creased, her initials on the outside, R.W. Inside, a journal weathered and thick with graph paper filled with fractal scribbles, but it was the single sheet, tucked in the back, that stopped her. "A letter, if you're reading this, Ruth, I'm sorry you got here this way." It was in her grandfather's voice, solid as prairie limestone, marked by regret. She slumped to the floor, reading. "You're probably broke or nearly there. They would never let you have what's owed. I found what's under this land. This company, they wanted the dirt, not the bones, not the kitchen. They lied. I hid my notes, hoping one day you'd look where they never did." Her vision went swimmy, fingers trembling on the dry, thin edges. He'd left this for her, not for her mother, not for anyone who'd sold them out. In the envelope, geological diagrams with arrows in red ink, a handful of odd chips, glittering ore, sample codes, enough to make her blink twice. She almost missed the last page, a series of numbers. Coordinates, months, technical notations. "Prove it, Ruth. Show them what they buried. Don't let them steal twice." Voices echoed from above, men's voices, raspy, impatient, barking to each other about the old broad snooping. She froze and snapped the notebook shut. There was more to find, but all she could see, all she could feel, was the wild, panicked rise of something like hope. Ruth pressed deeper into the room. On a tilted shelf, she spotted a battered audio recorder, red paint chipped. She thumbed it on an old click, her grandfather's huffing breath. "Never trust a mining man, Ruthie. They smile wide, they offer fair, but they never say how deep they dig." The tape hissed, then crackled out. With a grunt, she pressed her back to the wall, footsteps overhead, moving briskly now. With shaking hands, she stuffed the journal, ore samples, and tape recorder into her bag. Every inch of the room screamed danger. A battered file cabinet, half collapsed, caught her eye. She yanked open the bottom drawer. Inside, land surveys, purchase contracts, photos of company men grinning from shiny trucks, signatures scrawled beside her grandfather S, and one more note. A letter in different handwriting, sharp and nervous. We'll make it official as long as you never say a word about the test results. No names, but she recognized the logo in the corner, the gold company that bought her family out in the recession just for grazing rights. She remembered the way her mother had smiled, new car keys in hand. It's a blessing, Ruth, they just want dirt, no one cares about old rocks. Even now, her chest ached with that betrayal. Shoving the evidence into her cardigan, Ruth listened as the other voices vanished, heading away, maybe for coffee, maybe, because they didn't think a broken-down restaurant was worth 2 minutes of their time. At that second, the wind outside shifted, howling, carrying winter's edge across the plains. She climbed out of the crawlspace as quietly as she could, hands raw and knees shaking. The sun had edged behind a blistered cloud, and the air stung as she hustled back across the gravel to her car. The storm would be here in less than 3 days. Once it locked the road, she'd either be stuck for months or lose her only chance to prove the land was more than worthless sand. Ruth pressed her phone against her forehead. The only ally she could trust was a woman called Elaine, a clerk at the county land office, always sympathetic with a drawl like February syrup and an eye for things no one else read. She dialed. "Ruthie," came Elaine's voice, amused and worried. "You sound like you ran a race." "You ever seen a lab under a horse stall?" Ruth's voice shook, but she forced a laugh. "I just did, and I found maps, contracts, samples. Better than that, I found proof my grandfather wasn't crazy." A pause. "Come to my office. I'll put on some coffee, but you'd better hurry, just heard the county's already plowing the back roads, expecting the worst." Ruth eyed the horizon, dark clouds gathering, biting wind. 30 minutes, she said. As she drove toward town, the first flakes of snow slid along the windshield, barely visible, almost a warning. Wind howled as she parked behind the courthouse. Elaine's office was fluorescent lit, lined with boxes and stacks of survey maps. The heat ran too high, making Ruth sweat as she entered. Elaine waved. "Girl, you really look like you crawled through Hades." Her smile crinkled her eyes, but she was serious as she gestured for Ruth to close the door. Ruth dumped her haul onto the desk: journal, loose pages or samples, tape recorder. Elaine picked up a sample, whistled low. "You know what this is?" "Nope, didn't have time for geology. That's why I worked logistics." Ruth's old defense, but she was watching Elaine's face. Elaine turned over the sample, her fingers sure. "This is gold ore, good as any I've sent out last year, and the surveys, Ruth, these show tested reserves. Proven, not guesses." Ruth sagged into a patched chair, feeling muscles throb. "And the company?" Elaine's voice dropped. "They paid pennies, Ruth, and I see whose signature that is." She tapped the contract. "But here, you see this." He left the claim open, never transferred mineral rights. They thought they took it all, but the land's yours. The value that matters isn't theirs yet. The storm warning flashed on Elaine's phone. 72 hours top before we're cut off. Ruth swallowed hard. "So I do what? Sit tight and hope." Elaine snorted, pouring coffee. "No, honey, you tell the legal office you're contesting that transfer. Then, I know a guy at the New York Times, their investigative team. They sniff around dirty miners more than coyotes do." Ruth let out something between a laugh and a cough. "Me, the New York Times." Elaine grinned, sliding her a form. "You're more interesting than you think, but hurry. If that storm hits, you're stuck until March." They worked together, scanning pages, sending anonymous drops. Elaine spoke as she typed. "I always wondered why your mother acted nervous when old Mr. Monroe came around." "Something to hide," Ruth muttered. "Never looked at me straight." Elaine paused, frowned, then turned back to the screen. "Your grandfather trusted you, Ruth. He saw what was buried here." For a moment, Ruth could almost feel him. Sawdust on his jacket, smile ghosting in the kitchen, saying goodnight before vanishing into the dusk. "Let them come, let them see," Ruth whispered. But even as hope surged, the phone at Elaine's elbow rang. A stern voice came through. "Mrs. Walker, is there a reason someone's reported movement in the Waterhouse diner? We had, shall we say, unusual interest from some of the company's people." Elaine covered the mouthpiece, widened her eyes. "You should go, take the evidence with you, stay somewhere safe tonight." Ruth grabbed her bag, nodded, and slipped out the back while Elaine fielded the call with a steady voice. The danger wasn't abstract anymore. Night fell fast on the plains. Ruth bunkered in her car, parked at the edge of town, cradling the taped-up folder and the faded tape recorder. Her mind spun. The company must have known, maybe not the full truth, but enough to want her gone. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Minutes later, a text lit up her cracked screen. "We know what you found. Walk away or end up cold." No number, no hint. Just the wind screaming outside and the sudden knowledge she was being watched. Ruth gripped her cane, cursing her luck, then ran a thumb across the folder for comfort. "What do you want, old girl?" she whispered to herself. "Revenge or just a minute's peace?" The answer trembled in her voice, honest and raw. "I want to finish what he started." The weather grew worse. The diner, she realized, was no longer safe. There were too many eyes, too much at stake. Tomorrow morning, the lawyer's office, the probate court on Main, would see more drama than it had in years. Inside her car, Ruth read every contract twice, organized her evidence, and wrote down her contact at the Times. She imagined walking into that courtroom, where the mining company execs laughed and sipped coffee from silver thermoses, and revealing everything. The storm would begin by then. There'd be no way out, but neither, she told herself, would there be a way back. The next morning, the world had whitened. Every fence post a shining finger in the snow, every field wrapped in silence so thick it muffled even engine noise. Ruth wore 3 layers of sweaters. She pulled up at the courthouse, knees aching as she clambered from the driver's seat to the door. Her cane tapped on old tile. Her presence barely caused a ripple. The company reps, dressed sharp, barely looked up from their tablets. Until the clerk called her name. Inside the probate court waiting area, Ruth was 10 years older than everyone else. Corporate lawyers, teeth too white, faked sympathy as they smiled past her. She clutched her evidence. Her knuckles throbbed, breath clouding in the powder-cold air. A wide man in a blue suit beamed at her, voice sweet as poison. "Ma'am, looks like you're here about that little restaurant." She nodded, silent. He leaned in, voice low. "Whole thing's a misunderstanding. Once you sign, you get $3,000 cash. Walk away clean." She snorted, "You want to buy me out today?" Smile faltered, "It's no good to you, you know." Her tone flat, "I'll take my chances." He frowned but hurried away, muttering into his phone. The hours blurred as snow thickened outside, and the courtroom bustled with holiday probate chaos. Just then, Elaine, her face pinched and excited, slid into the seat beside her. She whispered, "Got confirmation. The Times team is interested. One of their reporters is flying in, storm or not." Ruth blinked, "Before the road's close." Elaine grinned, "She's already landed in Amarillo. She'll be here by 4, weather holds." Ruth closed her eyes, let her breath out slow. "We have one shot." The doors opened. The lawyers called the case number. And Ruth, straightening her shoulders, pausing only to grip Elaine's hand for luck, rose to face the men who'd erased her family's home with a smile and a half-truth. But before she could reach the bench, a sharp voice rose behind her, a company rep, young, pale, eyes flicking nervously to Ruth, then down to his phone. "Did anyone check the chain of title? There's a conflict. Someone filed a mineral rights claim." The room went silent. All eyes turned ruthlessly toward Ruth, expectantly. She cleared her throat, not trusting her voice. "I have documents. I wish to submit them for the record." The judge, unconvinced, gestured resignedly. "Proceed, Mrs. Walker," Elaine interjected, handing over the folder, And the evidence is more than documents. There's an audio tape, samples. This is a bond violation and a breach of contract. Gasps rippled through the room. The blue-suited executive leapt up, lips curling. That's not admissible, she's faking. Ruth's voice was iron. You want to explain why your company had my grandfather sign contracts that excluded his test results, then buried the proof of what was in the ground. Maybe you can tell the judge. The judge's brow furrowed. Let's hear that tape. Elaine pressed play. Her grandfather's voice, huffed and clear, poured from the recorder. Never trust a mining man, Ruthie. They smile wide, they offer fair, but they never say how deep they dig. The executive paled. Objection, he shouted, voice desperate, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. You'll have your chance to respond, Mr. Harper. She turned a steely glance on Ruth. This is substantial, is there more? Ruth produced the contracts, the marked maps. My grandfather found deposits, not livestock. They bought grazing rights. Land was worth 20 times what they paid. They coerced a silence. Before he passed, he left this here, for his granddaughter, for me. The courtroom shifted, murmurs, sideways glances, shaken heads. Mr. Harper sneered, trying to gain purchase. She's inventing all this. If these documents were worth anything, why hide them in a stable? Elaine arched an eyebrow. Because you sent men 20 years ago to clean up before the paperwork cleared. I saw you. My mother was your secretary. The crowd snapped back, eyes now locked on Elaine, murmured accusations building. The judge, voice like a gavel, I'll admit all evidence for review. This will be settled today. Mrs. Walker, you will retain your rights pending investigation. Mr. Harper barked into his phone, panic beginning to show. Call the Amarillo office now, stop her. Ruth let a tired relief slide over her bones, but the confrontation wasn't over. At the door, a tight-faced woman in glasses pushed past the bailiff. New York Times reporter. She wasted no time, flipping open a recorder. I heard there's a hidden lab, an unreported gold vein, and 3 decades of silence. Care to comment? Her voice was razor-edged curiosity. Ruth only smiled. Comment runs in ore too, you just have to trust the sample's pure. Elaine grinned. That's a Texas yes if you needed a translation. The lawyer for the mining company tried once more, voice lowered now. You're making trouble for nothing, you could have just taken the cash. Ruth shook her head, voice low but firm. My grandfather gave me one thing, he trusted me even if no one else did. I'm done letting you decide what that's worth. The judge interrupted, officially now on court record. All mineral rights claims are on hold. Pending document authentication and witness depositions, the company is to cease operations. Mrs. Walker will be awarded damages if these documents hold. That is final. A roar of discontent. Company lawyers scrambling, cell phones flying out as the New York Times reporter signaled to her photographer. And there at the center, Ruth stood unmoved, eyes never leaving Mr. Harper's panicked face. He tried one last time, voice thin, clutching the last folder in his kit as if it could save him. This won't stand. We have real lawyers. We can outlast her. Ruth leaned forward, voice quiet and low, clear enough for the crowd to hear. You really want to do this in front of everyone? Fine, here. She nodded to Elaine, who produced the backup folder they'd made overnight. That folder, open it unless you're scared. The executive wavered, eyes darting. Don't act surprised. You lied to the entire board, Ruth snapped. He smirked, but it was thin, sweat pooling under his collar. You think this'll matter, no one will care. She didn't give ground. They will when they see what you buried, she said, voice steady now. Read it out loud now. He hesitated, then with a trembling hand took the file. Reporters clustered, mics extended, eyes sharp. He read, stammering, test results, reserves, preliminary value, 17.8 million in precious metal. The crowd inhaled as one. Ruth let the silence settle. You still want to offer me 3,000. Chaos erupted. Reporters shouted questions. The company rep crumpled the folder in his fist, mouth working, then lurching from the room. The judge handed down orders. Probate court will reverse previous land distributions. Company will pay punitive damages with interest pending review. This hearing is adjourned. Outside, the wind carried Ruth's victory farther than the courthouse steps. Elaine squeezed her hand. She whispered, "You did it. You beat them. You changed the story." Ruth let out a breath she'd held for decades. "Never thought I'd see the day." Mr. Harper was last seen being photographed, pale and ashen, by the courthouse steps as his own board turned away from him. The mining company scrambled, public scandal, reporters from all over the state dialing in. When the Times published their story, every radio in the county played Ruth's name. That winter storm locked the roads for 6 weeks. By then, no one cared to come for the Waterhouse property again. Ruth built a cabin on that land the following spring, quiet and warm. Elaine visited often, and the late sun spilled across Orrich dust and young grass. If you ever doubted what's buried under years of debt of disbelievers, remember Ruth. She didn't ask to be a hero. She just refused to let the world decide her value for her. For some secrets, persistence is the only key. And in the Texas Panhandle, when the wind finds someone stubborn enough to dig deeper, it sometimes brings not just gold, but peace and the truth, at last, above ground. After the courthouse fell silent and the last reporter drifted away, Ruth stood in the frost-stiff parking lot, letting her cane sink a little into the drifted snow. Her hands ached from the cold, but her heart felt bright and raw, like the sun rising over a prairie after a killing frost. Elaine spun her keys on a calloused finger, studying her friend. "You sure you don't want to ride back to your motel, Ruthie?" Ruth shook her head, a wry smile tugging her lips. No sense hiding now, nothing left to be scared of except the price of gas. Elaine clucked her tongue. "Well, call me if you need a hand shoveling out that old beast of a car, or a whiskey, or both." The sky was a blue so brittle it looked likely to shatter. Ruth watched Elaine's taillights blink away through the curtain of snow. The courthouse behind her, for the first time in 20 years, no longer felt like a threat. When the wind shifted, she heard faint yelling, the company men struggling to get their SUVs started as the temperature dropped. She almost felt sorry for them, almost. The next morning, the New York Times reporter was waiting by the diner's faded sign. She wore boots dusted with snow and a parka with a press badge pinned to her lapel, scribbling notes in a battered pad. As Ruth approached, the reporter looked up and grinned. "Tough place to be famous," she called. Ruth smirked. "Depends on your definition of tough." A cold morning sunlight glistened off the icicles dangling from the sign. The news had already spread. People drove by slow, windows rolling down to gawk at the woman who toppled a corporation. Inside, the diner's kitchen was colder than a meat locker, but the tables and booths, swathed in sheets, looked almost inviting. The reporter followed Ruth inside, curiosity burning so bright it almost warmed the place. "I have to ask, were you scared yesterday when you confronted them?" Ruth considered. "I've been scared since I was a girl." She glanced at her reflection in a window streaked with frost. "But that doesn't mean you stop moving." The reporter scribbled, then hesitated. "How long did you know there was gold beneath the land?" Ruth shook her head, letting the quiet stretch. "Didn't know until 2 days ago. Course, someone else did, that's why they came after us. They figured I was just an old woman, easy to buy off or scare off." "You could have walked away, you nearly did." Ruth smiled, remembering her grandfather's quiet stubbornness. "Sometimes the only thing you get to keep in this life is your backbone." It was enough. The reporter packed her notes with a promise, a real story, not just for New York, but for every small town that had been told it wasn't worth the ground it sat on. The first weeks were a blizzard of letters and phone calls. Attorneys from the state, federal agents, curious onlookers, some eager, some cautious, some furious, all wanted a piece of the truth. Elaine served as Ruth's ad hoc manager, screening calls and shoving paper under Ruth's nose until her hand cramped from signing so many affidavits and forms. They held their own little press conference in the courthouse annex. Ruth, arms folded, cane at her side, listened as lawyers outlined terms. The company would transfer all rights, pay damages, and issue a public apology to the Walker family. The judge read the statement herself, her voice echoing in the wood-paneled gloom. Elaine brought coffee after. "What are you gonna do with all that money, Ruth?" Ruth blew on her cup, thoughtful. "Pay off the last of Mama's debts. Fix up the diner, maybe get a real freezer in here, one that doesn't sound like a dying tractor. I figure the rest can sit tight a while." Elaine's eyes sparkled. "Open it again, the Waterhouse Diner. Maybe give people somewhere to drink coffee and tell stories." Ruth let a smile slip through the lines on her weathered face. "Seems like this town could use a little proof you don't have to leave to get ahead." Elaine tucked in close, quiet. "You always were the toughest old gal I ever met." Ruth made a face. "I'm not old, I'm seasoned." They both laughed, the sound bouncing against tile and glass. By late March, the snow retreated into ditches, pooling in muddy rivulets by fence lines and dead cottonwoods. Trucks delivered supplies to the diner, and Ruth, stubborn as a winter wind, oversaw every repair. When reporters called, she gave interviews in an apron, scrubbing grease from the faucet or prying open cases of coffee mugs. One day, a boy from town watched as Ruth hammered up a new open sign. His hair stuck up in cowlicks, face red from the wind. "Miss Ruth." She paused, hitching a hip onto her cane. "What's on your mind, Jackie?" The boy shuffled his boots. "My daddy says you beat the mine men, that true?" Ruth's gaze softened. "Men like that, they only win if you let them." Jackie considered. "He says you found gold." "Maybe." She glanced at the patch of prairie dust showing between melting drifts. "See that dirt? Everybody walked right past it, thought it was nothing. But you treat land right, it gives back all kind of things." Jackie grinned. "My grandma says you're braver'n John Wayne." Ruth ruffled his hair with a free hand. "Tell her that'll cost her 2 pieces of pie." He ran off whooping as Elaine stepped out to join her. "You ever going to tell him how close you came to losing all this?" Elaine asked, quiet. Ruth shook her head. "Let him think it was never in doubt." On opening day, sunlight glared off clean windows and the new paint glowed against the battered old siding. Neighbors and ranchers filled every booth, ordering pancakes and gravy, demanding Ruth tell the story again, how she'd found the first note in the stall, how she'd crawled through dust and data to outlast the big men. Reporters came and went, but the story belonged to the town, now echoed in jokes and memories, pressed into scrapbook pages and told to wide-eyed children lapping up melted ice cream from sweating glasses. Late that afternoon, Ruth stood at the threshold, apron spattered and hands aching, watching as customers drifted home. Elaine joined her, dropping into the one remaining seat at the old counter. "Good crowd," Elaine said softly. "Haven't seen this place so full since Ike was president." Ruth grunted, pouring 2 mugs of coffee, one for each of them. "Still feels like a dream, like I'll wake up and Mama will be in the back room, hollering for me to check the burners." Elaine squeezed her hand. "You did good. That mine company won't try it again, not with every newspaper in the country watching." "Maybe so," Ruth allowed. "But I keep thinking about why Granddad hid everything so careful. He could have sold all this, made enough to leave, but he left it for us for this place. All that stubbornness, maybe it was worth something after all." Elaine lifted her mug. "To stubbornness." Ruth clinked hers, "and to not letting the past bury us." They sipped together as dusk slipped across the prairie and the neon sign out front, Waterhouse Diner, home since 1946, hummed to life for the first time in years. The months rolled by on tracks of rain and wind. Ruth grew something new in the earth she'd fought for. She planted wildflowers where trucks once scraped away clay, watched rabbits and prairie dogs reclaim the field. She walked her property at dawn, sunlight spilling over frost-tipped grass, and thought of her grandfather, his faith in the land, his quiet hope that one day someone would see beneath the dust. One evening, after the dinner crowd waned, a stranger came in city shoes, briefcase, the wary look of a man testing unfamiliar ground. He perched carefully at the counter, studying Ruth's face as if trying to place it. "You're the woman from the news," he said at last, "the one who broke the story." She nodded, pouring him coffee out of habit. "My name's Caldwell," he said after a moment. "I represent a group interested in investing in your mineral rights. We'd be willing to offer, you name the price." Ruth snorted, setting down the carafe with a thump. "I fought 30 years to get this land back. I think I'll keep it a while longer." He started to smile, habit, not heart, but it faded beneath Ruth's direct stare. "Well, if you change your mind." "I won't." She poured him a glass of water, offered pie. "But you're welcome to sit and watch the sun go down. That's more valuable than all you're looking for anyway." He held her gaze, uncertain, then folded. Together in companionable silence, they watched the daylight fade. By midsummer, the gold beneath the Walker land was the least interesting thing about the Waterhouse diner. People came for Ruth's stories, Elaine's laugh, the way the coffee never ran out and the pie always tasted of home. Letters arrived, thank yous from towns on the edge, places battered by the same storms of debt and false promises Ruth once faced. She read them all, sometimes with a lump in her throat, sometimes with a gruff snort about people needing to handle their own business. But she answered every one. Some days she found herself standing by the old stable, feeling the world spin on in fragile balance. She swept her palm along the sagging door, grateful for the ache in her bones, for every minute she still had to call the land her own. Elaine teased her about her legend, how someday they'd put up a statue of Ruth with her cane like Lady Liberty, facing down the mining men. Ruth swatted at her with a bar towel. "They build me a statue, you'd better see to it I'm holding a piece of pie, not a law book." Evenings fell easy. The wind sang in the cottonwoods, drifting through windows thrown open to the night. Ruth cooked up gumbo now and then for the crowd, watched the kids dart between tables, wore her hair long in a braid like she did as a girl. Sometimes, when the air smelled of fresh rain and iron, she'd imagine Granddad in the next booth, winking over a cup of black coffee. People lingered long after close, telling stories of hard years, of sudden fortunes, of secrets dug up and finally brought into the daylight. Ruth listened, adding her own memories to theirs, a living patchwork of what it meant to belong somewhere and to fight for it. When the next winter storm came, strong, icy as regret, Ruth was ready. The diner roof was sound, the larder full, the phone lines open and humming. That year no one went hungry, no one was alone, and every night the neon sign cut the prairie dark, lighting up snow like starlight come down to earth. She started out with $83, an old car, and a heap of debt that wasn't hers. Now, as she poured a nightcap for Elaine, she realized her fortune was measured not in ounces of gold, but in hands clasped, voices lifted, and land that would never be sold out from under her again. Elaine, warm with tiredness, grinned across a clutter of plates. "So, hero or just stubborn, Ruthie?" Ruth set the pie server down, surveying her kingdom, friends, family, land regained. Her cane tapped once against the floor. "Maybe you can be both," she answered. And outside, the wind carried her laughter farther than she'd ever dared to hope.